Every single morning, you wake up and check the pillow. You count the strands in the shower drain. You angle the bathroom mirror to avoid looking at the top of your head because you already know what you will see. And while you have been spending money on foams and pills and clinic consultations that never seem to end, there is a root that has been used for over 1,000 years with a name that literally translates to black-haired. It grows in a bucket. And your doctor has probably never mentioned it once. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly what this root is, how to grow it yourself, and the one preparation mistake that turns a remedy into a risk. Let me tell you what the options look like right now for the average person watching their hair thin out year after year. You go to a dermatologist. If you are lucky, they take it seriously. If you are a woman, there is a good chance they brush it off entirely. But even when they do pay attention, the toolbox is small. There is minoxidil, which you rub onto your scalp twice a day for the rest of your life. And the moment you stop, everything you gained falls out again within months. There is finasteride, which works for some men but carries a side effect profile that includes things most people do not want to talk about openly. And then there is hair transplant surgery, which can cost anywhere from $4,000 to $15,000 depending on where you go and how much coverage you need. None of these are cures. Every single one of them is a management strategy. You are not fixing the problem. You are renting a temporary delay. And I am not saying this to be cynical. The doctors offering these treatments are doing what the system trained them to do. But here is the part nobody talks about. The system itself has a blind spot, a massive one. And that blind spot is shaped exactly like a plant. There is no patent on a root that grows in the ground. There is no recurring prescription revenue on something you can cultivate in your own backyard. There is no shareholder meeting where someone presents a quarterly growth chart for a vine that costs almost nothing to propagate. The economics simply do not work in favor of you ever hearing about it, so you never do. But in a small village in China, sometime during the Tang Dynasty, over 1,000 years ago, a man named He Tian'er was already old. He was frail. His hair had gone completely gray. He had no children. By every measure of his time and culture, his life was considered a failure. And then something happened that changed not just his life, but the name of a plant for the next 12 centuries. He noticed animals in the hills returning to the same vine again and again, not grazing casually, seeking it out deliberately, the roots specifically. He began digging those roots and eating them. Nobody told him to. No physician prescribed it. He just watched what the animals already knew. Within months, his gray hair began to darken. Within a year, it turned black. His energy returned. His vitality came back in a way that stunned the people around him. He went on to father children. And according to records preserved in some of the oldest pharmacological texts in Chinese medicine, he lived past the age of 100. The story became so famous that the root itself was renamed. They stopped calling it by its old botanical name and started calling it He Shu Wu, Mr. He whose hair turned black. That is not a marketing slogan. That is a name given by a civilization that watched it happen and decided the result was more important than the taxonomy. So what is actually inside this root that could do something like that? The plant is called He Shu Wu in traditional Chinese medicine. In the Western supplement market, you will usually see it labeled as Fo-tea. Its botanical name is Polygonum multiflorum, though it has been reclassified more recently as Rhinotria multiflora. It is a climbing vine with heart-shaped leaves and clusters of small white flowers, and it belongs to the same family as buckwheat and rhubarb. But the part that matters is underground. The dense, tuberous root is where everything important concentrates. And what the root does inside your body starts to explain why He Tian'er's story was not just folklore. Your hair does not fall out because it dies. That is one of the biggest misconceptions people carry around. Each hair follicle on your head cycles between a growth phase and a resting phase. During the growth phase, the follicle is active, producing a visible strand that gets longer day by day. Then a signal arrives telling it to stop. The follicle enters a resting phase. The strand eventually falls out, and if everything is working correctly, the cycle restarts. But in people experiencing hair loss, that signal to stop arrives too early. The growth phase gets shorter and shorter. The resting phase gets longer. The strands that do grow back come in thinner and weaker each time until eventually the follicle produces nothing visible at all. That process is called follicular miniaturization, and it is the real engine behind most hair loss you see in both men and women. What researchers have found is that the primary compound inside this root appears to keep follicles in that growth phase for a longer period. It interacts with a signaling pathway that governs whether the follicle stays active or shuts down. Think of it like a timer on each hair follicle. In a healthy young scalp, that timer runs long. As you age, the timer gets shorter and shorter. This root seems to push the timer back toward where it used to be. Not permanently, not magically, but measurably. And then there is the color mechanism, which is the part that connects most directly to the legend. At the base of every hair follicle sit specialized cells whose only job is to produce pigment. The enzyme that drives their work slows down as you get older. Eventually, those cells stop producing pigment entirely, and that is when hair turns gray or white. The compounds in this root appear to reactivate that enzyme. They wake those pigment cells back up. This is why the legend is not a metaphor. The name He Shu Wu does not mean the root that made him feel younger. It means the root that made his hair turn black. The visual change was the proof that something real was happening beneath the surface. On top of all that, every follicle on your scalp is under constant oxidative assault. Pollution in cities like Beijing and Los Angeles and London. Ultraviolet radiation every time you step outside. Metabolic byproducts your own body generates. All of that damages follicles at the cellular level, and the root is loaded with compounds that neutralize that damage. Picture it as a protective barrier wrapping around each follicle, absorbing hits that would otherwise accelerate the miniaturization process. Now, here is the part that explains why none of this ever crossed over into Western medicine in any meaningful way. And it is not a conspiracy. It is simpler than that and honestly more frustrating. Western pharmaceutical development is built on a very specific model. You isolate a single compound. You patent it. You run it through clinical trials that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. You get FDA approval. You sell it at a price that recoups the investment and generates profit for shareholders. That model has produced genuinely life-saving drugs. But it has a structural limitation that almost nobody talks about. It cannot process a whole root with dozens of interacting compounds that has been used for centuries by a medical tradition operating on completely different principles. There is no mechanism to patent FOTI. There is no way to recoup a $300 million clinical trial investment on a plant that anyone can grow in their garden. So it does not get studied at that level. It does not get prescribed. It does not show up in the conversation your dermatologist has with you when you sit in that office worrying about your hairline. In China and Korea and Japan, this root never left the conversation. Practitioners still use it. Researchers still study it. Pharmacies still carry it in processed form. The forgetting happened here, not there. But here is where most people get this completely wrong. And this is the part I promised you at the beginning. The raw root and the processed root are not the same thing. This is critical. The unprocessed root contains high levels of free anthraquinones, which are compounds that are genuinely hard on your liver. While raw root contains high levels of hepatotoxic anthraquinones, hepatotoxicity reports in medical databases show that both raw and traditionally processed. He Shu Wu can cause herb-induced liver injury in susceptible individuals, likely due to idiosyncratic metabolic or genetic factors. The traditional preparation method developed over centuries in China involves slicing the root and steaming or simmering it for an extended period with black soybeans. That process fundamentally transforms the chemical profile. It reduces the compounds that stress the liver while preserving the ones that benefit your hair and overall vitality. This is not folk superstition. Modern analytical chemistry confirms the shift. The preparation is the medicine. Skip the preparation and you skip the entire point. Worse, you turn something beneficial into something that can actually hurt you. So, respect the process. Research it thoroughly before you ever consume it. And understand that the people who used this root safely for over 1,000 years were not casual about how they prepared it. Now let me tell you how to grow this plant yourself, because this is the part that puts the power back in your hands. First, sourcing. You can find Rainutria multiflora as potted plants or root cuttings from specialty herb nurseries, particularly those focused on traditional Chinese medicinal plants. Some sellers on gardening platforms carry it as well. One thing worth knowing is that in parts of the eastern United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, this plant is classified as invasive. That sounds like a warning, but from a grower's perspective, it actually tells you something useful. This vine wants to live. It is vigorous, resilient, and incredibly forgiving of mistakes. Just check your local regulations before planting it outdoors. For container growing, you want a deep pot, at least 5 gallons, but bigger is better. Remember, the root is what you are growing this plant for, and roots need room. Use a well-draining potting mix, something loose, not heavy clay. Position it in partial shade. Full sun works in cooler climates, but in places like Texas or Southern California or anywhere, the summers get brutal. Give it some afternoon protection. Keep the soil consistently moist, but never waterlogged. Soggy roots rot, and rot is the one thing this plant does not recover from easily. The vine climbs. It will reach several meters in a single growing season if you let it. Give it a trellis, a fence, even a simple stake structure. In temperate climates, it will die back to the root in winter and come roaring back in spring. If you are growing in a region with harsh winters, like Minnesota or upstate New York or northern Germany, you can move the container into a garage or sheltered area to protect it from deep freezes. And now the hard part. The root needs time. 3 to 4 years of growth before the compounds inside reach meaningful density. You cannot rush this. There is no fertilizer trick, no shortcut, no hack. The vine will be beautiful in the meantime, with those distinctive heart-shaped leaves and cascading white flowers. But the medicine is underground, building slowly, concentrating year after year. And honestly, the patience is part of the point. You are growing something that took 1,000 years of human observation to understand. Giving it 4 years of your attention is not a sacrifice. It is a collaboration. When you harvest, the root requires complex, multi-stage decoction, traditionally stewed or steamed repeatedly with black soybean juice. Because home processing carries serious risks of residual liver toxicity, if done incorrectly, homegrown plants are best enjoyed ornamentally, while medicinal use should strictly involve standardized, laboratory-tested prepared extracts under the guidance of a licensed herbalist or physician. What I will tell you is that the information exists. It has existed for centuries. It is detailed, specific, and well documented in traditional Chinese pharmacological texts. Here is what stays with me about all of this. Most of what you need has been growing somewhere on this planet for longer than modern medicine has existed. In mountain villages in Yunnan province, in backyard gardens in Sichuan, in the hills where a tired old man once watched animals dig at a vine and decided to try it himself. The question was never whether these plants work. The question was whether anyone would bother to tell you about them. Now you know about this one. A root with a name that remembers what it did. A vine that grows in a bucket on your patio. A remedy that asked for nothing except time and the patience to prepare it correctly. He, Tianer, gave his name to that root, and the only thing the story preserved about him across 1,200 years was that his hair turned black and he outlived everyone who doubted him.